Welcome back to English from A to Z. Today, we are diving deep into something, well, pretty universal for serious language learners. Getting better at speaking English, especially when you feel like, you just don't have anyone around to practice with. We all hit that point, right? You can read, you can understand shows maybe, but then you try to actually say something a bit complex and the words just stumble. Studying grammar books didn't quite cut it.
No, and just listening passively doesn't either. It helps comprehension, sure, but speaking is an active skill. You have to produce language.
Exactly. Production, that's the bottleneck.
It is. And for so many learners, it's not about lack of desire. It's finding the opportunity. How do you actually practice speaking, forming sentences, responding naturally when there's no one to talk to?
That's exactly what we're tackling today. We looked into some material outlining a really interesting technique, specifically for learners practicing solo, and it claims to help with sentence structure, vocabulary, grammar, but most importantly, just getting your thoughts out clearly and effectively.
Right, getting the ideas across. So let's dig into this method. Learning to speak through imitation.
Okay, let's unpack imitation, because first off, we need to be super clear. This isn't just like basic shadowing. We're not talking about just repeating words right after someone to copy their pronunciation. That has its place, sure, but this is deeper, more advanced.
Definitely more demanding cognitively. What's really interesting here is the active transformation involved. It's not passive mimicry. The basic idea is this. You listen to some speech, maybe a bit of conversation, a story, someone talking.
Yeah.
And then you pause and you try to deliver that same information, but crucially, in your own words, instantly. You're changing things as you go.
Okay. A concrete example time. The source material had a great one, using a little story. It really shows what you mean by transformation, or what they call the perspective shift. So the original speaker says, when I was a child, my parents liked to pretend.
Right. Simple enough start.
But the learner practicing this technique doesn't just echo that. They immediately shift it. They'd say something like, when he was a child, his parents liked to pretend. See? Instant change.
Exactly. And that change keeps going. So if the original continues, quote, that Santa Claus would bring us presents at Christmas.
The learner transforms that too.
Yep, they'd make it fit the new perspective. His parents like to pretend that Santa Claus would bring them presents at Christmas.
Ah, I see. So you're changing pronouns I to he, us to them on the fly.
And potentially verb tenses or other structures depending on the shift you make. The point isn't just repeating words.
It's forcing your brain to handle the grammar, the structure, while keeping the meaning intact. You're essentially retelling it from a different viewpoint, instantly.
Precisely. It's about communicating the idea through a new structural lens.
Okay, that makes sense. But it brings a practical point. What kind of audio do you even use for this?
Good question. Because if the source is too hard, too fast, or too slangy,
Yeah, you'll just get lost, right? Or maybe even pick up awkward phrasing.
that's a real concern. The source material is pretty clear on this.
Yeah.
You want something that's just slightly above your current comfortable listening level.
Yeah.
Challenging, but not impossible.
So not super fast, natural conversation with tons of interruptions and idioms necessarily.
Probably not at first. Ideally, you'd look for clear, well-structured speech. Think maybe short anecdotes from vloggers who speak clearly, or parts of audiobooks, or maybe TED Talks things that are scripted or semi-scripted.
Okay, clear and structured. And what about length? Should I grab like a whole movie?
Definitely not. No, the recommendation is to start with something fairly short, maybe 3 to 4 minutes long.
3 or 4 minutes, why that length?
It's short enough that you can listen and practice with it multiple times in one study session without burning out. But it's also long enough to actually contain some varied sentences and ideas to work with.
Got it. So find clear audio, about 3-4 minutes long. Now, once you have that, how do you actually do the imitation? How much do you try to imitate at once?
This is where the technique gets really practical. It uses this idea of progressive training starting easier and getting harder. There are basically three ways to approach it, like steps on a ladder.
Okay, a ladder. Let's start at the bottom rung. What's the easiest way in?
That's what they call the small portions approach. It's pretty much what we just demonstrated with the Santa example.
Ah, so phrase by phrase.
Exactly. You listen to just a small chunk, a few words, a short phrase, maybe a very short sentence. Pause the audio, then immediately make that perspective shift and say it out loud.
So you're practicing the transformation mechanics without having to remember too much at once.
Right. Low memory load, high focus on the shifting.
Makes sense. What's the next step up the ladder?
That would be the larger portions approach.
Yeah.
Or you could think of it as idea by idea.
Okay.
Now, here you let the speaker finish a more complete thought. Maybe it's a longer sentence or even a couple sentences together, say 10, 15 seconds of speech. Then you pause and you try to express that whole chunk of meaning, again, transformed into your chosen perspective. It requires a bit more working memory.
Right, holding the core idea while you restructure it.
Okay.
And the top of the ladder, the hardest level.
That's the whole speech delivery. This one's tough.
I bet.
You listen to the entire piece, the whole 3 or 4 minutes straight through, no pausing.
Okay.
Then you turn the audio off, put it away, and try to deliver the entire story or monologue yourself.
Oh.
From memory, retelling it, summarizing, transforming it as needed, all in one go.
Wow. Okay, that sounds like a real challenge. You're really relying on your own production skills there.
Completely. It forces you to structure the whole thing yourself.
So here's the really practical bit for someone wanting to try this. The source suggests not just picking one approach, but combining them, right, into something called easy to hard imitation.
Exactly. That's the system. It's based on that solid principle of progressive training you see in sports or learning musical instruments. Start easy, build the fundamentals, then gradually increase the difficulty.
Right, build that muscle memory for speaking.
Precisely. It forces improvement by constantly pushing the edge of your ability, but starting from a place where you can succeed.
So let's break down the steps for someone listening right now. How would you actually implement this easy to hard system? Step one seems pretty clear. Start small.
Yep. Dedicate your first few practice sessions, maybe even the first week, just to that small portions approach, phrase by phrase. Get really comfortable with making those quick grammatical shifts, pronouns, tenses, whatever the source requires.
Nail the basics first. Okay, then step two.
Move up. Once you feel pretty solid with the small chunks, start tackling the larger portions. Pause after a complete idea or a couple of sentences and practice retelling that bigger chunk. This builds your ability to hold and structure more complex thoughts.
Builds that working memory for speech. And the final step.
Step 3. Finish. This is the ultimate goal for that piece of audio. Attempt the whole speech delivery. Listen all the way through, then try to retell the whole thing yourself.
That's where you really test if you've internalized it, not just parroting.
Absolutely. I tried this myself with a little story from a podcast host. I thought I had it down after the first 2 stages.
Yeah.
Then I tried the finish stage, the whole thing from memory. About a minute in, I completely blanked on the order of events. It really showed me how much that final step forces genuine recall and structuring, not just repeating sounds.
That's a great illustration. It really forces active production. Okay, so we've got this method, this system, but let's talk about the payoff. If you're doing this alone, what are the actual tangible benefits for your English?
The benefits are quite profound, actually, because they target core skills, often without you even consciously focusing on them.
How so?
Well, first, correct structure. Because you're constantly listening to and then immediately trying to replicate correctly formed English sentences, your brain starts to absorb those patterns. You naturally learn how native speakers structure their thoughts.
So it kind of overwrites those awkward structures you might default to if you're translating in your head from your first language.
That's a big part of it. You're absorbing natural sentence flow. And that ties into the second benefit, fluency patterns.
Meaning.
You pick up on the common idioms, the expressions, the little connecting phrases, the rhythm and intonation patterns that people actually use in conversation. Stuff that textbooks often present in a really sterile way.
Right, the things that make you sound less like a textbook and more like a real person speaking.
Exactly. But perhaps the most fascinating benefit, the one that source material really highlights, is how this teaches grammar.
Grammar. But you're not studying rules here.
Precisely. It teaches grammar through a process called implicit learning.
Implicit learning. Okay, what's that?
Implicit learning is basically learning without realizing you're learning. It's learning that happens below the level of conscious awareness. Think about how babies learn their first language.
Right, they're not memorizing verb conjugation tables.
No, they're just surrounded by language, trying to understand and communicate. Their brains are soaking up the patterns, the rules, subconsciously. Implicit learning is that powerful, natural learning engine.
So how does the imitation technique trigger that?
It's the cognitive load, really. When you're doing that perspective shift, changing I to he, us to them, maybe adjusting tenses, you are so focused on getting the meaning right and making the transformation correctly.
Okay, you don't have mental energy left to think about grammar rules.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're not consciously thinking, okay, I need the past simple here, or, this requires the present perfect. Your brain just does it because it needs that structure to express the transformed idea accurately.
Your focus is entirely on communication, understanding the input, transforming it, and producing the output.
Right. And in the process, your brain is forced to internalize the underlying grammatical structures it needs to accomplish that task. But you're not aware it's happening. You're just focused on conveying the message.
So you are learning grammar, maybe even complex grammar, but implicitly, subconsciously.
That's the core idea.
Oh.
And according to the sources, that's a much more effective way to achieve true grammatical accuracy in spontaneous speech than consciously trying to apply rules while you talk. You internalize the patterns through use.
That makes a lot of sense. Using the structure to communicate meaning and thereby absorbing the structure itself.
Exactly. So we started off with this common frustration. How do I practice speaking? How do I get fluent if I don't have a speaking partner?
Yeah, a huge barrier for many.
And we've landed on a pretty concrete, actionable answer.
Yeah.
This imitation technique, especially when structured, using that easy to hard progression.
It gives you, the learner, a clear method to actively work on those crucial speaking skills, building sentences, sounding natural, getting the grammar right, all driven by focusing on meaning, tapping into that implicit learning power.
It really highlights the power of, well, trusting your brain's natural learning processes. Maybe the fastest route to fluency isn't always more conscious study, more rules. Maybe it's about setting up the right conditions like this imitation practice, where you're so focused on the idea you want to communicate that the correct language structures just sort of sneak in while you're not looking.
A fascinating thought. Let the focus on communication drive the structural learning.
So the final thought for you listening is, what piece of clear, engaging audio, maybe just 3 or 4 minutes long, a news report, an interview clip, a short story, what will you use to kick off your own easy to hard imitation practice today?